Thanks for joining me on episode 344 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Matt Woodrum, podcaster and father in training. I challenge you to invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, and impact the world by using your time, your talents, and your treasures, having the calling to face your demons and struggle to become a great father for your children. And one way to be inspired to do this is to listen to the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend Scott Maynard.
To really achieve your passion and your calling, you have to use your judgment and you have to evaluate tasks so that you can accomplish them and that you can prioritize and accomplish the things that are the most important. So to do that, you've got to pull this information out and you've got to be able to put it into a system.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about investing in others through stewarding your talent, I talk with you about the danger and damage of open loops, why you need an external brain to succeed at finding time to invest in others, and what to look for in an external brain so you can do the things that are the most important for you.
You've heard me talk about developing your talent, and one of the best ways to do that is through books. But if you're like most people today, it's hard to find the time to read. And that's why today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Go to inspiredstewardship.com/audible to sign up, and you can get a 30-day free trial. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from, and you can pick one and listen your way to developing your talents via Audible. That's inspiredstewardship.com/audible to get your free trial and listen to great books the same way you're listening to this podcast.
Yesterday, we were talking a little bit about time, and I want to bring some of the brain science that works with how we deal with time into today's episode so that we can talk about how you actually manage to free up time so that you can really spend time with the people and the relationships that you care about the most and that you really want to invest in. How can you make more time to invest in others? And to start with, we're going to talk a little bit about your brain. Your brain is one of your best tools for getting things done and for productivity. It really is. It's the single strongest asset that you have, but it also can be a huge trap that keeps you from being able to get the things done that you need to do to have the time to focus on the things that are the most important to you. See, one of the things that happens to our brains is we form these things called open loops. And what an open loop is, if you think about it in computer terminology, an open loop is a loop that doesn't ever close. And so it will repeat forever. It traps the computer in this endless loop of doing and redoing the exact same thing over and over and over again. And the things happens in our brain too. The same thing can happen in our brain where we get trapped into these loops of trying to remember something. Think about how you remember something like a phone number until you can get to a piece of paper and write it down. You sit there and you repeat it to yourself over and over again. You repeat to yourself the number until it sticks. And that happens with lots of different ideas. Your brain can do this. It can form these open loops, these traps of open thought and repeating to itself about anything that your brain figures is not as it should be. Anything that you need to do. It can even be something that someone else needs to do. Things that you need to remember, all of these little ideas that we need to jot down. Your brain has hundreds of ideas and things that happen during the day that get trapped into these little repeating open loops if you're not careful to find a way to close them. There's some research that shows that up to 50% of your mental energy, your cognitive capacity, the ability of your brain to focus on things is taken up by these open loops. So if you can find a way to close those loops and get rid of them, then you free up more brain space to allow you to then get things done, which is how you can open up the time that you really need to open up to do the things that are the most important to you. See, strangely, one of the things that happens to us a lot is we sacrifice the things that are really important to get done the things that feel like they're important but really aren't. We sacrifice time with our family to answer more email. We sacrifice time with our friends to be able to actually spend more time working. We sacrifice time on our building our own priorities and our own calling and working on the things that we feel are most important to do things that others have put on us as important. So how do you close these loops? Your brain will continue to loop on something until your brain trusts that you stored it in a way that gives you a chance of getting it done later. It's why jotting it down on a to-do list sometimes works to close the loop, but sometimes that stops working after a while, because if you start to forget to go back to that list and actually get things done, then your brain learns that, hey, when he writes it down, when she writes it down, that's not really a trustworthy place. See, it has to be stored somewhere where it won't be lost, stored somewhere where your brain knows that you review this regularly, stored somewhere where it can be turned into actions that you want to get done. To really achieve your passion and your calling, you have to use your judgment, and you have to evaluate tasks so that you can accomplish them and that you can prioritize and accomplish the things that are the most important. So to do that, you've got to pull this information out, and you've got to be able to put it into a system that allows you to store it and trust that it will come back in the time that you need. That is why you need an external system. You need a system outside of your brain that your brain trusts, so that when you put things into this system, your brain then trusts that it's done and can close the loop and move on to the next thing. So for me, I actually use a software tool. I use Asana for this. I've used other apps in the past, and there are dozens of apps out there. But you want an app that works for you. You want something, a system or an app or a tool or a process that allows you to store the task, make the task actionable, nest those tasks together and link them in some way and then break them apart, collect and store task information, especially for tasks that you do a lot, for repetitive tasks. You want something that if you need to, you can collaborate with others using that. And you need something that hides tasks but can bring them back as a just-in-time task, meaning that it hides something that's due weeks away or that you don't really need to be paying attention to today, but it'll pop it back up into your memory and into your to-do list at the time that you want it to, so that you can focus on it and get it done whenever it's possible, whenever it's ready, whenever it's time. If you begin to do this and use this to manage all of your little tasks and all of the stuff that right now it takes up huge amounts of your time storing it, and it takes up huge amounts of your brain space repeating it and keeping it in that open loop state, then what that does is it frees up your brain to be more productive, which then frees up time because you get more done when you are working. And then you can begin to balance your time and use your time with others well, and actually use it to invest and help others and live out your calling and do what you really are meant to do on this earth. So how do you do that? Well, you need to find an app that works for you. Again, I use Asana, and I'd be happy to talk to folks about why I use it, what's good about it. that was actually recommended to me by someone else, and now I'm a habitual user of it. There are apps like Todoist. There are apps like Nosby. If you search for to-do list and apps, there are a million of them. So really and truly pick one and start to use it, but look for one that has those features that I just talked about. Then begin to use it and begin to move some of these open loops out into the system and begin to close those loops. And productivity for your passion, the course I have on productivity, we spend a whole section on finding and using an external brain and setting it up so that it begins to keep track of these tasks and free up your cognitive space so you can really live out your passion. I encourage you to do that so that you can do what you are meant to do and stop spending time and brain power on all of these things that really aren't important. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of talent, you can go over to inspiredstewardship.com/talent and sign up for our 5-week series on the stewardship of talent. Or if you're in the U.S., you can text 44222 talent tips. That's talent tips to 44222 and get those tips. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.